the national headquarters of RT America and our nation's capital. Hello again, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez. Tonight we're going to get right to it. The trade talks between the United States and China are beginning in earnest, and it already appears that our team is claiming defeat even before the game actually begins. And what appears to be a complete reversal of earlier statements, President Trump is now saying that he does not expect that the China deal will even happen. And remember when Mr. Trump threatened to really, quote, crack down on China? The president appears to be backing off of that statement as well. Chinese business leaders, meanwhile, like Huawei's CEO Ren Zhengfei, are suddenly emboldened, seeming almost dismissive of Mr. Trump's threats. Listen to this.
Trump has nothing on us. He hopes to use Huawei as a bargaining chip, but China doesn't seem to buy it.
As a matter of fact, as these talks begin, it's actually becoming even more obvious that China feels like it's holding a pair of aces. That winning hand, 5G. 5G technology. Here once again is Huawei CEO Ren Zhengfei describing why it is that the U.S. could have more to lose by punishing China.
Even if they have supercomputers and super large capacity connections, the U.S. might still fall behind because they don't have super fast connections. Shutting Huawei out is the start of the U.S. falling behind.
These are strong words from officials in a country that usually are not that bold in such declarative statements. So who really is in the driver's seat in these talks between the United States and China? And of the two, who truly has the most to lose? Seems like there's a lot of bluffing going on right now from both sides. We are trying to keep score for you in a meeting with repercussions that go far beyond any political debates that may be going on right now in the United States. Here on the News with Rick Sanchez, where we believe, yep, we do, it's time to do news again. And here are the questions that we think you'll be asking tomorrow. Does the global economy hinge on these trade talks between the United States and China? We're watching it. Who wins the fighter jet wars between the United States and Russia? And can sitting, this is a fascinating report, can sitting actually be as bad for us as smoking? That's right, new report on this. First, what we like to call the A block, which begins with the U.S. seemingly backing down on the long-expected all-out assault on the Chinese economy. President Trump says it's because we, the United States, are strong, while China and the rest of the world is weak.
You know, you have the euro that tried to cut in. Well, the euro is now not doing so well. Europe is not doing so well. China's not doing very well. You look at other countries, we're the hottest economic country in the world. There's nobody close.
So is it really the case, what Mr. Trump just said, that China's economy is doing not so well? If so, why is the U.S. taking its threats off the table all of a sudden as the talks are about to begin? Fair question. Following this for us, NRS special correspondent Michele Greenstein. So, you know, to hear the president tell it, the U.S. economy, pardon me, the Chinese economy is on its last leg because of these threats of tariffs and some sanctions that have been applied to them. Is that true?
Well, let's not forget that Trump campaigned for a long time on making China come to the table, on forcing China to do things differently. So it's not uncommon for diplomats to, you know, call attention to other countries doing poorly and themselves doing well.
So it's politics.
Exactly. I mean, President Trump would not want to call attention to elements of the U.S. economy that are not doing well, because then he would be blamed for such failures. So it's not surprising at all. But let's talk about what's at stake between these two trade partners, between the U.S. and China, who is, by the way, our biggest trade partner to date. Now, U.S. and China exports and imports are really what this is all about. Last year, the U.S. imported $539.7 billion from China and exported only $120.1 billion to China. And Trump has long spoken about wanting to, quote unquote, balance out what he sees as an unfair situation between the two countries. He even spoke about how China is raping our country. Those are his words. Those are words that he campaigned on when it comes to the two countries. And he's also called this the greatest theft in the history of the world. So it makes sense that he's going to, spew a lot of rhetoric about how China is doing poorly. And by the way, it's all because of me that China is doing poorly.
But this is the first time, correct me if I'm wrong, at least in my lifetime, that I've ever seen the Chinese fire back the way that they have been firing back in the last couple of weeks. I remember my old friend Bart Chilton used to say, China doesn't get into these squabbles. They just sit back and let things happen. This time they're saying, you know what, you guys are hardening us. You're making us work even more. So when we look at this, considering the imports and exports as you described them, is there some kind of timeline now for what China will or won't do, given what's going on with these negotiations and the fact that they may feel like they have the upper hand and that the United States is full of bluster?
Well, let me give you a timeline. You could say this began last year when the U.S. slapped 25% tariffs on Chinese electronics, semiconductors, plastics, and railway equipment. Then China, as we know, retaliated, and they slapped their own tariffs on automobiles, planes, chemicals, and agricultural products like wheat, and mainly soy. Then the U.S., of course, slapped tariffs on China again, this time 10%, and then China retaliated. So we had us going back and forth a number of times. And then we reached that truce, and we had these trade talks that began this May. But of course, as we know, they broke down without a resolution coming into play. In total, though, during the totality of the year 2018, total U.S. tariffs applied exclusively to Chinese goods equal $250 billion. And on the other hand, we have total Chinese tariffs applied exclusively to U.S. goods equaling $110 billion. So another imbalance there.
China, it seems, is on the rise. I've seen numbers that say their economy in the last 30 or 40 years has quintupled. I mean, that's an amazing percentage, right? Are they sitting kind of, as we like to say, in the catbird seat in this negotiation?
Right. You could say they do less talking and more doing. Their economy has certainly been on the rise in recent decades, and some may say that the U.S.'s economy has actually been in decline, which is why this Huawei bargaining chip, as we might want to call it, makes a lot of sense, because China specifically in the area of technological dominance has been on the rise, and this is, of course, something that the U.S. would prefer not to be the case. The big tech powers have traditionally been from Western countries, which is why we have President Trump putting Huawei on this entity list. So we created a problem for them, and then it's become a bargaining chip in these trade talks. Now we offer a solution. Oh, maybe we'll lessen this ban on trading with Huawei now, although there's been no spying on Huawei being an agent for the Chinese state. There's no IP theft evidence yet as either.
If you want to hurt China, hurt Huawei. It's like if you're playing a football team, you want to take out their quarterback.
Right.
So it's kind of what they're doing. They're trying to hurt the superstar. Here's something that's interesting. Speaking of superstars, apparently China, according to reports coming out this afternoon, has this superstar negotiator, this guy who apparently they can bring in. His name is Zhong Shan. Who is this guy, and what's he going to do?
So he's the Commerce Secretary, and he's said to be perhaps more tougher, more hawkish from the Chinese standpoint, and it's unlikely that we're going to see a major concession being made by him towards the U.S. And leading the negotiations on the U.S.'s team, we, of course, have Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, who some may say represents the U.S. banking and multinational corporations' interests. But now these negotiations are about to resume this very week. People close to the matter say that it's unlikely we're going to see a major breakthrough, although we may see some smaller accomplishments, like China deciding to buy more agricultural goods from the U.S. or the U.S. banning, undoing a little bit the ban on Huawei trade.
Keep an eye on Zhong Zhang. I think I think this guy's going to be the real player.
Keep an eye and an ear on him.
I think he's going to be the real player in this thing, more than Mnuchin or Mr. Mnuchin. Now to a story about what we could call the weapons sweepstakes to see who gets more countries to buy its military technology. The only two real players in this game seem to be the Russians and the United States. The U.S. certainly has plenty of wins under its belt, but lately the Russians have had some wins of their own. The latest, a bid to supply India with advanced fighter jets. With more on this, RT correspondent Yulia Shapovalova.
A long-term Indian medium multi-role combat aircraft tender for the purchase of more than 100 medium fighters is moving forward. Applicants who want to receive $20 billion, that's the estimated sum of the contract, are constantly changing. According to the Indian press, last week the favorite was the F-21 and a veteran fighter F-16 assembled specially for India. The Russian MiG-35 is also being considered.
Indian Air Chief Marshal Birender Singh Dhanoa recently got a hands-on experience with the aircraft during a visit to Russia. He said he had no doubts that the MiG-35 belonged to its class. The jet's marketed as a 4++ generation fighter, meaning it has to have modern and efficient avionics, no matter what some critics might say about Russian aviation innovation. But such a big spend isn't just down to the military. It's for the Indian government to decide which planes taxpayers' money is spent on. Russia says India recently put a spoke in the wheel in their aviation deals by pulling out of a joint project to develop a modified Su-57 fifth-generation fighter jet, which was to be built in India. Even the Indian Defense Ministry's support wasn't enough to keep the government on board. Back in 2011, the MiG-29 was in the frame for the tender, but technical limitations ruled it out. Now the MiG-35 is being named as a totally new fighter, building on the MiG-29's legacy. The $50 million fighter is in service with the Russian Air Force. Now it's up to India to decide.
Meanwhile, the mass production of Su-57 fighters has begun in Russia, according to the Sukhoi Bureau that produces the jets.
The fifth-generation multifunctional aviation complex, with high intelligence onboard equipment, low visibility, larger capabilities for intercepting air targets and destroying ground targets. In 2019, it was launched into serial production. A long-term contract was signed with the Ministry of Defense for the supply of more than 70 aircraft.
The Russian army plans to receive the first batch of 12 Su-57s later this year. In total, the Russian Defense Ministry has ordered 76 fifth-generation fighters. In May, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the task to completely re-equip 3 aviation regiments of the Russian Air Force with the Su-57.
It first took to the skies in 2010, scoring with fans for its high maneuverability, supersonic flight, as well as cutting-edge equipment and stealth abilities. The manufacturer is particularly pleased with the fighter's infrared tracking equipment, which can detect multiple targets over a long distance. Russian military aviation has long kept rivals on their toes and attracted buyers worldwide. And it shouldn't be too long before we know if India wants to expand its fleet with even more cutting-edge jets.
Yulia Shapovalov, the news of Rick Sanchez.
This is really interesting. We forget sometimes that economies are based oftentimes on military weaponry, even though we wish we lived in a world where this stuff would be unnecessary. Unfortunately, it is necessary to many countries. Joining us now, former Naval Intelligence Officer John Jordan, to take us through what Indians' needs are and if they would do well by buying this Su-57, right? Tell us about the Su-57. Is this something that Russians can really be proud of, or is it a little bit of a flawed technology?
Well, it's more premature than flawed. The Russians, Sukhoi, the design bureau, hasn't even really got the engines finalized for it. Right now, they're still flying on the same engines as the Su-35, and the Russian government is going to build 76 of them, as Yulia just said. India just pulled out of a joint project with Russia to build the Su-57. So the Su-57 may be a little further down the road and may be very expensive. Bear in mind, the F-35 was the most expensive weapon system in history. And it took the United States and dozens of other countries, including Japan, Denmark, the UK, Israel, and Norway, and Turkey, all to participate to shoulder that cost. And Russia, in this case, being asked to field a fifth-generation fighter, that's a lot of resources being allocated towards an airplane without a partner to share those costs.
So the Russians have always been fantastic when it comes to ground hardware, tanks, that type of stuff. Apparently, their S-400 missile defense system, everybody loves that. So that must be pretty good. What I hear you saying is this particular technology may not be as, as robust as some of those others?
No, it's just not mature yet. It's still going through a lot of its teething pains. It's hugely expensive. You know, countries field different weapon systems and allocate them according to their political needs and their economic resources and their areas of expertise. The Russians have always excelled at surface-to-air missile systems, and the most recent body of it being the S-400 and the next one coming after that. People talk about the Stinger, you know, the Stinger surface-to-air missile is an American system. The man-portable system is used such effect in Afghanistan. Right. But you know, that concept was actually Russian in origin with the SA-7. The Russians actually invented that concept.
Yeah, but we stole it and made it better, okay? So stop that. Okay, I'm kidding. Hey, I got a question for you. This is interesting. With all the drones and the AI technology that's out there, these fighter jets, like the like the 57 or the 35, aren't they becoming maybe less essential in the future?
Well, that's a great question. I think that we're going in that direction. You know, I'm a pilot. I've got over 9,000 hours of flight time myself, including a lot in jets. Basically, you know, we've been reading about the end of the pilot era since the 70s, if you go back and look at a lot of the trade journals then. Now it looks like AI technology and drone technology is catching up to the point where it may not make sense to put a pilot in an airplane. Keep in mind, when you build a fighter jet, you have to build the life support systems and all of the apparatus necessary to keep a pilot alive just to have a human brain in that airplane. It may not make sense in the future. There's also limitations to the number of Gs it can pull. So it remains to be seen if that continues to be the case and if it continues to be worth it. I think ultimately we're going to hit the end of the utility of that.
That's amazing, especially last week when we were all doing stories about all these drones that were being shot down in Iran or off the coast of Iran, and how much worse it would have been if those drones had been manned. In other words, if they'd been jet with pilots that were shot down. John Jordan, as usual, great conversation. We learn whenever we have you on. Thank you, my friend. Now to another alarming story. This one's about your health. If you are like a lot of Americans and you spend most of your day and your nights sitting down, literally sitting down. And here's the problem. Because of our sedentary lifestyle nowadays, brought on by a myriad of reasons, we can go on forever, including technology, we are becoming, especially here in this country, in America, we as Americans are becoming very unhealthy. So what are the experts saying? You know what they're saying? This. Stand up, man. Stand up. Take the stairs. Try and run more. Walk if you can. I mean, if you can't run, walk. Do whatever it takes to get off your assumption that lazy is good. Do you like what I did with that? With more on what we're learning about oversitting, here is RT correspondent Trinity Chavez.
Forget about being out and about. These days, people are spending most of their time, well, sitting down. That's according to new research that says Americans aren't making the national guidelines for physical activity, experts calling it a troubling trend. According to a study published in JAMA, the amount of time Americans spend sitting down has jumped an hour a day in recent years.
Internet.
Internet?
Totally.
Why?
Everything. You got it. Porn, social media. I mean, way more than an hour, I suppose.
While the amount of time sitting down increased for all ages, the researchers found that adolescents sit more than any other groups. In fact, the study found their total sitting time typically increased from 7 to 8 hours a day. Adults also sat for about an hour more a day that decade, but sat less overall, increasing sitting time from an average of just 5 hours a day to a little over 6 hours a day. And here in the U.S., the researchers found that most of the population spends about 3 hours a day or more sitting, watching television or videos.
I sit straight through 3 hours watching the computer, easily.
The author of the study said in a statement, "It's very concerning where there's such an increase in sitting time on a national level across all age groups, especially taking into consideration the health risks that come with this." More time spent watching TV, playing video games, as well as more time sitting at work and commuting have been documented in studies in Europe and Australia involving both children and adults, while previous U.S.-based studies were limited to just children.
We have a lot of things now where you can order food and now they're bringing it to you, so that's decreasing traffic.
Meanwhile, the results of sitting time varied across sex, race, weight, and the amount of physical activity people engaged in. Now, experts say that some level of physical activity is better than nothing, so they say safe for adults to start sitting less and to do more of any amount of moderate to vigorous physical activity because you'll gain some health benefits. Reporting in New York, Trinity Chavez, RT.
Oh, my God. Joining us now is Dr. John Dombrowski. He is a specialist in pain management. I mean, he's the perfect guy to talk to about this. He's the #1 guy when it comes to this topic here in our nation's capital, by the way. I don't know where to begin. Recently, my family and I went to Disney World, and I saw a lot of very big people who could walk, but they chose to take those little scooters to get around.
Right.
What the hell's going on?
So I think the main thing is talking about this right now, because if you don't use it, you'll lose it. So before you get to this morbid obesity where you can't move, start early. And again, your point is incredibly well taken. Stand up. That takes a lot of calories just to stand. If you sit more than 8 hours a day, your risk factors, any sort of health illness goes up by 20%. It is the new smoking. It's not as dramatic as smoking, but we want to get people's attention that this is a real fixable problem in terms of your chronic illness, your back pain. How are you going to ambulate around with your kids and your grandchildren?
It's psychological, though, right? It's a social psychological response that we have ingrained in ourselves, that if we go to the grocery store, we're willing to wait 20 minutes until a parking spot opens up next to the front door, John.
Right. Yeah, don't get the best parking spot. Exactly. All those things you've kind of talked about are very simple, and you can do this right now. And instead of soft drinks, use water. Instead of taking the elevator, take the stairs. We are not chained to the desk. Get up. Everyone's got a smart watch or smartphone. Set a timer every 45 minutes. I'm going to take a coffee break. I'm going to take us a little stretch. It's not only your work productivity will be better, but it's better for your back as well.
I want to be totally transparent. John is my doctor. I have gone to see him on a couple of occasions recently. I'll be honest with you. I was having some very severe back issues. It recently kind of raised its head again, I should say, after I was doing something and my back hurt. I had a decision I could make, either lie down and rest or go out and do some kind of walking and exercising, warm it up. I chose the latter. It worked. The pain went away.
Oh, darn it. I couldn't get to see it. So, yes, exactly. That is the right thing to do. We did a study in the 80s where we had back pain. Oh, go to the bed, take a rest. It was the worst thing we could ever do. So best thing is exactly what you did. Get up and get some exercise.
But some people will use the excuse, oh, my God, I can't, my sciatica, my this, my that, and then they'll use it as an excuse to not move. What you're saying on the air here to our viewers is, unless it's obviously a broken bone or something critical, move. Exactly. Even if you feel like you're slightly injured.
Right. I mean, again, talk to your physician about these things and all with that caveat understanding. But a lot of the times we use back pain or pain in general as social excuses. I don't want to meet my mother-in-law. I've got that headache. Or I've got this back pain. I'm not going to go out and help you out. It's my bad back. Again, try not to use the excuses. You got to get up and move.
How much is the technology a problem for doctors like you when you talk to your patients? Because they're relying on their cell phones, on their computers, they sit and watch TV for hours on end.
Right. And again, I think you're right. It is very mind-numbing. We could binge watch, a Breaking Bad, and we just don't get up. We don't realize, oh, my God, 4 hours went by. What happened? That's why
11.
Right. Set your smartphone. Set an alarm. 45 minutes. Get up and walk. Stretch.
Is there a problem with the medications that we are taking today that tend to slow us down more than they would be? And the other question I want to ask you before I run out of time, water.
Yeah.
How much is it about too much, the wrong medications, too many medications, and not enough of this?
Sure. So as I said from the start, sweet sugary drinks is what we always use. Try to switch to water. Easy one to do.
Okay.
The other thing is with respect to medications, most medications, antihypertensive and things like that, might slow you down a little bit, but if you're well managed by a good physician, you really shouldn't have that problem. So don't let that be an excuse.
It's great to see you.
Right. Bye.
Stick around. I got a couple of medical questions.
I'll be happy to.
John Dombrowski, thank you, doctor. We appreciate it. This is now where we get to have you ask us questions or make comments, and not necessarily medical questions. A lot of you commented on our report on how MSNBC has a bias toward pro-corporate, pro-war candidates, and how a contributor there actually said she just hates Bernie Sanders so much that he makes her skin crawl. She had no reason for it, by the way, just hates him. RJG says, Rachel Maddow and Russiagate make my skin crawl. Then Randall says yes, because Bernie Sanders goes against entitled candidates. Ralphie says Bernie Sanders is the only Democrat who has the chance to beat Trump, but they will screw him like they did in 2016. Yes, they did, by the way. That's true. Look it up. Second-class citizen says Bernie Sanders gives me goosebumps, and I feel like I'm on fire. And then finally, Jose Mendoza says, oh no, RT is Russian propaganda, according to the corporate shills. But on a serious note, great job with this video. Thank you. Nice compliment. We appreciate it. We'll take all the compliments we can get. But if you got something negative to say, that's all right, too. We'll take your feedback. All right, write to us on YouTube. Let us know what you think after you watch our videos. And you can also reach us in social media as well. By the way, just because we didn't post your videos or your comments doesn't mean that we're not reading everything that you guys have to say. All right, let me get back here because there's one other fascinating story I want to share with you tonight. This one, by the way, is about Australian scientists have uncovered new details regarding human history. And it means me and you. Research suggests that our DNA is way more complex than previously thought, and the culprit, our long history of breeding with different species. What? Here's Natasha Sweet to explain.
According to new research, present-day humans are a result of archaic interbreeding. Scientists say Homo sapiens reproduced with 4 other extinct hominin species some 50,000 years ago. When learning about how we came to be, interbreeding isn't exactly something that came into the discussion. That is, until now. Researchers out of Australia found that Homo sapiens interbred with 4 other extinct hominin groups, including Neanderthals and Denisovans. Other groups remain unnamed, with traces of their DNA being found in modern populations. The study, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, revealed that at least 3 different hominin groups were found in Asia. Researchers say all present-day populations show about 2% of Neanderthal ancestry. They say this indicates Neanderthals mixed with ancestors of modern humans soon after leaving Africa. Scientists behind the findings believe the interbreeding began when they traveled to the Middle East. But then ancestors of modern humans traveled further east, mixing with at least 4 different groups of archaic humans. Scientists believe this was likely in Asia. Now, scientists analyzed genetic, archaeological, and fossil evidence in their study, and they say these findings remain present in our DNA. In Los Angeles, Natasha Sweet, RT.
Wait, one more thing. Finally tonight, 50 years after the moon landing, we've just learned something new about this moon landing. Scientists have discovered that the moon, are you ready, is actually 100 million years older than we first thought it was. So why are we learning about this now? Well, this is actually very interesting. During the 1969 Apollo 11 mission, the spaceship's crew actually brought back nearly 50 pounds of moon rocks and other samples from the moon's surface. Scientists from the University of Cologne grabbed some of these samples, as well as some from other moon trips, and used the latest technology to try and test and compare it to other samples. They concluded that the moon was formed 50 million years after our solar system was born, which was, by the way, 4.5 billion years ago. Scientists are hoping that the discovery will help us learn more details about the creation of our own planet, because after all, Earth is at least as old now as the moon. Ain't that cool? Yes, it is.